going to stand for the pledge.
Sometimes even that is slowed up. Contact our office and Michelle that works miracles on that sort of thing. She also manages our congressional art competition. As you may or may not know, those of us in the Congress sponsor an annual art competition from the high schools in our district. Any high school student is eligible to participate in it. It is multimedia. That is, it's not limited to one type of art. Some people say, well, wait a second, how can you compare a photograph to a painting to a multimedia? Well, that's just the way it is, folks. We only get one per district. And the winner of that also gets 3 tickets from Southwest Airlines to fly to Washington, D.C. for the ceremonies that we have, so that the artists in this district can meet the artists from all around the country. And then the artwork that they have actually hangs in one of the halls of Congress. It's actually now a tunnel through which all of the official public tours go through. So literally, hundreds of thousands, not more than 1 million people see that artwork as they go in. And that is managed in our office by Michelle. Oliver Chu is our constituent service representative. He was with my predecessor before I was elected. Then he was with me. Then he decided to work for the state, for State Senator Dave Cox. Realized it was so much better here. Actually came back. We're so happy that he came back because he is really an expert on dealing with citizenship and immigration issues, and helps us very much on that. Helps us with military issues, workers' comp, postal service, and manages our military academy appointments program. As you may know, probably 90% of the appointments to the military academies are done by members of Congress. And they give so many slots per congressional district. And so we have the opportunity to appoint young men and women to the academy. And so we need to make sure that we work with the high schools and work with the students. I've had in the past some high schools, not necessarily in this district, but previously, where they just decided they didn't like the military and therefore they were not going to cooperate to allow any young person to have the opportunity to go to the academy. Now you can have your point of view about the military, you can have your point of view about our foreign policy, etc. It just seems to me you ought to at least give our young people the opportunity for them and their families to make that decision. And so what we try and do is connect with all the high schools in our district so that our young people who are in our high schools have an opportunity, if they wish, to compete for an appointment to the academy. So that's all of the academies. And we're very proud to have a number of young men and women there now. And we just say for those of you who have children or grandchildren, have them contact us at the beginning of their junior year at least, so that we can make sure they have all the classes they need and the extracurricular activities. Actually, it's better if they contact us earlier than that so that they understand the leadership qualities that the academies are looking for and how that is in addition to an outstanding academic program. Josiah Pendergast is district representative. He provides representation throughout the district on my behalf. He travels all over the district. You may see him here at other times. He helps coordinate our federal grant program, the PAGE program. The only time you ever hear about the PAGE program is when there's a scandal. I just want to tell you it's an excellent program for young high school students who are juniors. We have programs, essentially the major program is attending your junior year of high school back there. They have classes on a daily basis, but they also work on the floor of the House of Representatives and throughout the Capitol complex. When I was there 20-some years ago, we had a decision whether or not to maintain the PAGE program because of the problem. As part of that committee, I voted that we continue the program because it gives great opportunities to young men and women, but that we really shore it up. In those days, they had to find where they were going to live, and they lived in boarding houses. We now have dormitories for the pages. And we have adults that supervise them. And we make sure that we don't get into trouble. It's a great program. We've been privileged to have a number of them. Now they do it their junior year. Some do it for both semesters, some only do it for one semester. We also have short-term programs during the summertime, which can be as short as 2 weeks. And you can't always get a position, but we've done a pretty good job of that. And Josiah is the person in the office that helps us with that. Let me see who else we have here. We have Karen Moore. Karen is one of my legislative counsel. We have several people who work on legislative affairs back in D.C. The head of my legislative division is the former law school dean and someone who worked for me 25 years ago. Obviously, Karen didn't work for me 25 years ago. She is from the district, I went to school here, both high school and community college, before she earned a basketball scholarship to Fordham University. She obviously was not a point guard. Did a great job there, went to law school. We managed to hire her. She does a great job for us back in Washington, D.C. We have Major Bill Kale. Now, he is a major in the Air Force, soon to be a colonel in the Air Force. They have a program of legislative fellows, where people in the military of a certain rank can compete to see if they can have fellowships to serve in the executive branch and the legislative branch. And we were lucky enough to get Bill to be with us for a year. He's an engineer by training. He has been in the war zone, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's done a great job for us, and just we're very pleased that he's able, under the program, both to work in our district office here and also back in Washington, D.C. Brian Cavaney. Brian Cavaney, yes, he is here. Brian is from the Washington, D.C. office, communications director in California, although from Southern California originally, does a wonderful job for us on our communications in various different areas. And we have 3 other staff people who are about to show up, and we will announce them when they get here. One thing I should mention. If you're going to be in Washington, D.C., you're going to have tours. Please contact our D.C. office or visit the website at www.arlington.house.gov in plenty of time for us to help you with those tours. I think I can say that we give about as good a tour as anybody. I mean, my staff does do a great job. But there are also other tours that may be available to you that we have an ability to get you in line for if we know about it soon enough. All right, now, the ground rules are we'll talk about anything you want to talk about. But I want to start talking about energy. I've had 9 teletown halls. Some of you may have gotten me on the phone, or I've gotten you on the phone. We've called, we've had those. We probably had a total of 60 over the last 4 years, with 9 this year. I would have to say that the major issue for the last 4 months has been energy. The second major issue is energy. The third major issue is energy. Next issue after that is housing. Next issue after that, I would say, is probably illegal immigration, and then Iraq. And so it is one of these things that you try and confront and develop a response to and develop a program for. I don't think there's any issue that's more severely affecting American people right now. And I'll be glad to hear from you later on if you think there are those. But than energy. And it's the increase in gas prices, even though they've moderated over the last couple of weeks, they're still so much higher than they used to be. I had a town hall in Ione about 3 weeks ago, and someone said, I've had to have my adult daughter move back in with me because she can't afford the transportation costs from where she moved to work every single day. I just bought a gallon of milk the other day. Highest price I've paid for it in a long time. It was actually more than $5. Maybe I should have gone to another store, but it was much more expensive than I've seen in any place I've been before. And you see some of your food costs going up. And part of that is the transportation costs that are embedded in everything we buy. That's impacting us. One thing that's going to affect us greatly this winter across the country are heating costs. Natural gas and heating oil. They're going through the roof. Going through the roof. As petroleum prices have gone up, natural gas prices have gone up. And it's going to impact us across the country. You may have seen recently that the unemployment rates have gone up. And across the country, but here in California. And one of the things that I'm absolutely convinced of is the transportation cost increases are affecting our entire economy and affecting jobs. So I think we need to really deal with it. You may have seen this in the news, but a week ago Friday, let me put it this way. I happen to be a Republican. The leadership is Democrat. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. We have asked for a simple vote on an energy production program. I can't guarantee we'll win. I think we will because, of course, all Republicans vote for it. I've talked to enough Democrats, we would have enough Democrats to join us that we would have more than a majority, a strong majority in the House of Representatives to pass an energy production, an American energy production plan. And all we asked for was a simple vote before we adjourned for this district work period. And we didn't get it. And so we wanted to not adjourn, to vote against the adjournment resolution, and keep us there until we have to vote. The adjournment resolution passed by one vote. They forced some of their reluctant members on their side of the aisle to actually vote for it, and the adjournment resolution was such that it cut off debate. We couldn't even debate the issue of energy. And so when that happened, a number of us, actually it was 48 in number, I believe, stayed on the floor, and we kept debating the issue despite the fact they adjourned. And the Speaker of the House turned the lights off, turned off the microphone, and closed down the television sets. Now, you say, well, I watch C-SPAN and I can see anything that happens. The cameras for C-SPAN everywhere else are not controlled by the Speaker. C-SPAN decides where they're going to film, what hearing, what program is taking place, if there's a protest. The only cameras that are controlled by the Speaker of the House are on the House floor, and she ordered them turned off. So we couldn't be speaking on it. So what we did was we invited members of the public, like you, to come down from the galleries and sit in the seats on the floor of the House while we debated this. And some of my colleagues who came back, and we have continued to keep this up for the last week and a half, and we're going to try and keep this up until we finally get a vote on it. We came up with a plan we called the American Energy Act. I'm a co-sponsor, original co-sponsor of it. And it takes what we call an all-of-the-above approach, meaning that we think there ought to be wind and solar, and so we would continue the tax credits for that kind of production. We think that there ought to be oil drilling offshore. I do believe that. We think we ought to look at Anwar. I'll be happy to talk about that. 10.4 billion barrels of oil there. There's also another section in Alaska called NPR, not National Public Radio, but the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, which we think has 10.4 billion barrels of oil. We think we ought to look at oil shale. Some estimates are we may have as many as 3 trillion barrels of oil from shale oil. Now, there's some environmental questions, there's some water questions we have to deal with, but shouldn't we try and get technology that allows us to do that? Coal, we happen to think we ought to have huge clean coal, coal to liquid. I happen to think that in the area of biomass, there are many opportunities. We have a program down at UC Davis that deals with garbage. They're taking garbage from some restaurants in San Francisco and using it and converting it to usable energy. They're also taking grass clippings and using that. I have been in contact with the Department of Energy to ensure that the cellulosic program, that's the one where we deal with breaking cell structure down to convert it to a different mode so that you have usable energy, that forest products are part of that. I mean, we've had, 2,100 fires throughout California, most of them Northern California, almost all of them caused by lightning strikes. The potential is great all through this area, all through the Sierra. And I just think we could have healthier forests if we were able to take out that fuel that's there and convert it in ways that makes it economical. One of the problems is, because when I was talking with the Department of Energy, the number 2 person and 2 of the people just below that on this, they said, if you look at it internally, even though the President talks about switchgrass, you've heard him give these speeches about switchgrass, forest products are actually at the top of our list. But the leadership last year, and I believe it was the energy bill, slipped in a provision that said we can't use any of it if it comes off of federal land. So all of a sudden the volume that could be used for this potentially was reduced substantially so that a lot of people who had investment in the outside, that is private investors, pulled back. because all of a sudden they saw this wasn't as great a potential as they thought otherwise. I think we ought to change that. I think nuclear is something we ought to look at. I was in France about 4 months ago to look at what they've done there. They've done a tremendous job. They've reduced the waste from fuel plants to about 5% of what it was before. And lastly, when I was there, I had the opportunity to go and visit something called ITER, I-T-E-R, the International Thermonuclear Energy Research Program. It came out of an agreement between President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. Actually, Gorbachev first suggested it, Ronald Reagan accepted it. It was the idea to have a multinational, a number of countries around the world invited to participate in it, research project to see if fusion works. Now, I'm not a scientist. If you talk to any of my teachers in high school, you can understand when I say that. But the fact of the matter is, it was explained to me as simply as possible as this. Fusion is actually burning water for hydrogen energy. When I was there, I asked them, if this works, and let's just be honest, it's going to cost billions of dollars to figure out if it works. But if it works, in 35 years, that's long term, that will affect my children, my grandchildren. In 35 years, it means we would be able to burn water for energy. And I said, well, give me an idea so I can explain to people what that means. They said if you took the top 1 inch of water, just the top 1 inch of water off our Great Lakes in the United States, it would have greater energy than all of the known petroleum reserves in the world today would produce. Now, not only would that be great for us, but think how that would change the equation in world politics. Maybe we wouldn't have to worry about some of these dictators and some of these countries with all this oil. Maybe we just had to make sure that people could use water. You can use salt water as well as fresh water. Last thing I would just say before I open up any questions that you might have or comments that you might have. On the energy side, we have done a best job of any time in our nation's history in reducing our energy usage over the last several months. We've had the greatest drop in 26 years in the use of petroleum products in the United States. Now, some of that has hurt us with the economy, and some of it is because the economy has slowed down. But the fact of the matter is, the American people are responding. We're becoming more efficient. We're being more careful about where we drive and so forth, and sometimes how we drive. Conservation, if you look at the houses we built over the last 20 years, if you look at all sorts of buildings that we have, they're far more efficient than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. We've done a great job on that, and I want us to continue to do that. That's why I still believe we ought to have these tax credits and other incentives. But that's not going to do it by itself. Because we're in a worldwide market, worldwide economy. China and India are coming online very, very strong. They want to be where we are. I don't blame them. China has something like 26 million cars today. By the year 2030, it's estimated they'll have 120 million cars. Now they've got to run on something. India's coming up fast. These countries are utilizing energy because they need to utilize energy. And so we're going to have to increase energy as well. I would argue that we ought to have American energy produced in America by Americans using American technology, American workers, American ingenuity. And it's not the total answer. Anybody who tells you the total answer is wrong, but it is part of the answer. And I just happen to think that when I grew up, I respected my parents a great deal. They came out of one of the great generations in the history of America. I mean, remember, they had to live through the Depression. They took on two great totalitarian regimes at the time that those totalitarian regimes were winning. We jumped in on the losing side and we won that war. We won the Cold War. We put a man on the moon. We defeated polio. We had the Civil Rights Revolution. And you couldn't have done a single one of those things, not a single one of those things, if we'd adopted an attitude that some in Washington have right now, which is the challenges are too great, we can't do it. We've got to learn to basically bury our heads in the sand. The days of American greatness are over. We have to understand that there's nothing exceptional about America. I may be old-fashioned. I think there's something very exceptional about America. And I have to think hubris and being prideful about it. We ought to be realistic about it and with some humility face the future, but understand that we have an obligation to try and turn over a country to our children and grandchildren that is at least as good as the one that was turned over to us by our parents. Now, open it up for questions, but here's what I'd like to ask is I want to try and find out who came the furthest. All those of you who took 10 minutes or more to get here. 20 minutes or more to get here. 30 minutes or more to get here. Anybody take an hour to get here? Okay, let me, okay. I'm going to have you ask the first question. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. And I was yesterday in Washington, D.C. I came back yesterday night. So,
you came 3,000 miles. All right, we got it.
So I was discussing particularly the energy problem with some experts from Europe, and particularly Germans and some French also. I was wondering why we don't apply solar energy in California as much as it's done in Germany, for example. And also here in this county, we have a history of energy which is going back to the Gold Rush War. 1880, we had a French gentleman who brought electricity all the way from Calaveras County to San Francisco. So we have resources in water, we have forest resources that you have mentioned. By the way, I want to compliment you for your job at the Congress on energy. You've passed several bills that are outstanding. How could we in this county be more energy producing and energy concerned and energy active and create jobs about energy? What could you suggest we should do?
One of the reasons why I support extending the tax credits for solar and wind energy is that if we don't, let me back up a little. People will respond to economic messages. It's hard for you to convince people to use wind energy or solar energy, but it costs a lot more than other energy that's available to them. And right now, wind and solar energy can't compete totally on their own without some government incentives. I don't want to see it such that they become absolutely dependent on government incentives, that is tax credits and so forth. I want to help mature those industries so that we find that as you have more capital flow there because it in fact is a good investment, you have advances in technology to make this work better than it has before. I have in my district, for instance, a small company in Sacramento County that has come up with a wind turbine that's about 12 feet tall, sits on a 4-foot platform, so it's 16 feet in all. If you have an industrial building, 1 or 2 stories high, flat roof, you put it on there, and that would, in an area that has, let's say, not insignificant wind, doesn't have to be just blowing through like one of the Great Valleys, you could produce enough energy for that particular location. It doesn't go on the grid, it goes to that location. If you look at solar panels today, they are so much better than they were 10 or 20 years ago. The house I live in Gold River is about 21 years old. The simple solar panel that they put on there for hot water doesn't work. Never was that efficient. But there are new systems that are close to making that efficient. So I think one of the things I can do in Washington, D.C. is to try and create those incentives, or maintain those incentives, which otherwise will actually expire at the end of this year, so that you can help mature that community, that production community. Secondly, it seems to me we ought to take a position that we're looking at all of the areas of energy. And here, one of them, in this county, for instance, you talked about water, hydro. Now, I enjoy being on the river. I enjoy that sort of thing. But I also understand that hydroelectric power, in some ways properly placed, is the cleanest, most renewable energy source we have. And I think we ought to be looking at that instead of saying we can't look at it. And I think we ought to do that in all areas. Now, on the national level, if you look at coal, for instance, we are the Saudi Arabia of coal. We have more coal than anybody else in the world. And there are those who say because coal is dirty, we ought to put it off limits. Now, in fact, the matter is we use a lot of coal already to make it extremely difficult for us. But secondly, it seems to me we ought to try and develop a technology that makes it as clean as possible. And thirdly, China is using
coal and will continue to use coal, do you think they will spend the time to create the technology for the clean coal use? Have you seen TV lately, the Olympics? If we're gonna see that not only for the United States but for the world, it seems to me we have to be involved in it instead of saying we're not going to be involved in it. So that's what I would say. We need a multiple energy resource approach. And I know it's controversial to talk about offshore drilling. A lot of it is because of what happened in Santa Barbara in 1969. In 1969, I was in my first year of law school at USC. Arnold Schwarzenegger had just arrived. He was not the governor at the time. He was a rather prominent weightlifter at the time. I'm not sure what Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer were doing, but I know they're not senators at that time, and I don't know if they hold any public office at all. My point is, things have changed since 1969. Does anybody? I don't think anybody had BlackBerry then. I'm not sure anybody had a cell phone then. I would venture to guess in 1969, even though we had color television, most people in America had black and white television. And so you see the changes that have taken place. The technology today is far different. The blowout that took place in Santa Barbara most likely could not happen today because you have shutdown valves that are at the surface of the ocean floor or below now that you didn't have then. Here's the crazy deal. We have laws right now that prohibit any offshore drilling off Florida for 100 miles for the entire state, and in some cases, 200 miles. Cuba right now has made lease agreements with a number of foreign countries, including China, to allow them to drill. Now, China has not drilled yet. I know you hear on radio and television, China's drilled. They have not yet drilled, but they have the right to drill. If they drill under their lease agreement, they will drill within 45 miles of the Florida coast. Perfectly legal under international law. It does not make sense to me for us to say we will not do it using American technology. You think they'll be a little more concerned about the environment than we will? I don't think so. And I just would like to see it. The other thing is, those would be American jobs, American equipment. We had, I think, something on the order of 5,000 rigs about 10 years ago. We're down to about 2,500 rigs today. So some of the people say, well, you know, it'll take a long time to do it. Part of it is we destroyed part of that industry with respect to development here in the United States. And a lot of those rigs are overseas. You build here. The other thing is, my friend John McCain has an idea for 45 new nuclear plants over the next decade. That would create on a permanent basis about 700,000 American jobs, in addition to the energy. So I think a lot of those things make a lot of sense. Yes, ma'am, way in the back.
Speaker Pelosi was on there last night.
I heard that.
And did you hear the first thing that she said that she thinks we ought to do is to release the National Strategic Oil Reserve?
Right.
And my question is, would that potentially compromise our military? Because isn't that what that's for? And how do you feel about it going to the funds?
It's not a good idea, and the reason is this. We established SPUR, Strategic Petroleum Reserve, in the 1970s following an effort by some in OPEC from the Middle East to basically whipsaw us on energy. They made an intentional act in a number of those states to withdraw petroleum products from the world market, specifically to hurt the United States. We overcame that following several policies. But one of the things that came out of that was, in order to be able to prevent that from happening in the future, we would create a strategic petroleum reserve where we would take and buy oil when we could, usually on the market when it was cheapest, and pump it into the ground in basically some natural basins that exist in the United States, and have that reserve to be used for a short-term interruption. A short-term interruption, meaning that it's man-made, some other country trying to blackmail us, or in the case of Katrina, where Katrina came through and knocked out a good part of our oil industry. A number of the platforms were disabled, although no serious oil spills took place. But we also have a good number of refineries down there, and a lot of them were taken offline because of the damage that they suffered. That should have taught us two things. One is, we can't have a total concentration of production and refining that makes us vulnerable to a single national or natural disaster. And secondly, it taught us that the petroleum reserve can help for short-term interruptions. But that's not what we're dealing with now. We're dealing now with a worldwide supply issue, question, challenge, whatever you want to call it, that's long-term. With China and India coming to the fore, with all of us using more energy. I mean, you know, we use energy in a lot of these contraptions that we have and things that we have. People say, well, just make it electric. Well, you got to have the juice to begin that sort of thing. So as a result, it is a long-term problem that we have to face, and releasing anything out of the reserve does nothing to help us long-term. All it does is take more of it out of the petroleum reserve, most of which we bought at very cheap prices compared to today's prices, with the expectation we're going to have to buy some back in the near term, which will cost more. It doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense at all. Yes, ma'am.
There's something just get to us about this whole environmental thing. Maybe you can explain it to me, because what I don't understand with the hold that the environmentalists have against drilling and resupplying our own energy. Instead, we have to buy it from Arab countries that put it in tankers that schlep it all over our oceans and leak it and cause spills. What is the matter with using our own oil? We're the third largest oil producer in the world, which bothers me because, well, look at the Olympics. Are we satisfied being bronze? No, we want to be gold. Why are we third in anything? We should be selling, if anybody's selling to China, we should be. We should have a pipeline right from Alaska over to China direct and undercut the Arab countries and sell oil cheaper and make all the profits ourselves. Look at Alaska. Those people up there don't pay state taxes. They get money every year in oil reserves. In California, we could do that. We could not pay any state taxes.
Well, you haven't talked to state legislature. I think they could beat you on that, but I understand.
I would like to call myself an environmentalist, but I don't nowadays because of the eco-terrorists that are environmentalists. My husband and I ride our horses to town to get the mail, and we live 3 miles out of town. So we do our part to save energy. I'm born and raised on a cattle ranch, so I'm environmental. And that's why what the environmentalists are doing makes no sense at all. They are damaging the environment by making us go all the way over and drag oil from another part of the world when we have our own. And the Alaska pipeline has proven that we can get oil out of the ground and deliver it to the lower 48 with our wonderful technology that doesn't do eco damage. So why don't we guys stand up to the environmentalists and tell them that they're eco-terrorists? They're making no sense at all. We watched Saddam Hussein from outer space burn oil fields.
That's right.
So was he a better steward of getting oil out of the ground than we would be in our country?
On that point, let me just remind people, remember when those fires burned? Remember that in Kuwait when they said fire? What were we told? They would last for 100 years. We got some Texas wildcatters who went out there and within 100 days they put out every single fire. Now that's using American ingenuity to deal with a disaster that was man-made. Look, I can't answer why people have different points of view and give me a 0 in their ratings and so forth, so they obviously don't think that I think the same as they do. But I would there are some who really do believe that if we invade nature, we are trampling upon nature, we're better off if we weren't around for it. And I understand that. I don't agree with them, but I understand. They want to have even more wilderness, they frankly make the whole country will. There are those who believe that we can't be trusted. It's the dirty oil companies, it's the terrible politicians, it's the nasty business people, it's the farmers and the ranchers who are just trying to get rich and so forth. I mean, they actually do believe that. And so it's a question of trust. There are those who do not have faith to any extent in technology, American or otherwise. So they look at what happened in 1969 in Santa Barbara, and they think that would happen today. The fact of the matter is, the vast majority of oil seepage in the Santa Barbara Channel takes place naturally. The pressure under the ocean floor through the porous floor structure creates natural seepage. We got reports from the first folks who showed up there and wrote about it, tar balls on the beach as a result of this coming up. It wasn't some oil tanker out there. We didn't have oil tankers yet. And actually, you can show from a scientific and technology standpoint that if you actually drill there and pull the petroleum out, you reduce the pressure and you actually reduce the natural seepage. The number one man-made threat to the oceans from an oil standpoint is tankers that run aground. That's where we've had the biggest disasters. Now, we have done a lot better. The tankers today are a lot safer than they were before. The double hull, there's all sorts of things that protect against it, but still, that's a more dangerous situation than actually oil drilling. We can drill with platforms you can't see. We can do slant drilling and horizontal drilling that will go for miles. We used to be able to do. And sometimes if you go into a structure, if you come across it this way instead of that way, you actually release more of the oil that's there. That's why some of these fields are yielding more now than we ever thought they would yield. I just think it's a question of balance. I mean, look, there are some people who would frankly rape the environment just to do whatever they want to do, and there are some people who don't think they ought to touch the environment. I think most of us are somewhere in between. We think we can exploit the resources that God put there, and we can protect the environment and be good stewards as well. Before I came back to Congress this time, I was a law firm that represented this small Native American community that's up there in England. And I would say 99% of the folks who live there believe that we should be drilling it. The other thing is I happened to be in Congress in 79 and 80, first time around, when Jimmy Carter signed the law that we passed, which set aside the Alaska National Refuge manual. But in those millions of acres, tens of millions of acres we set aside one section, it's either 1005 or 1002, 2,000 acres, in which we said this is to be held here for possible exploration and production in the future. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the rest. We're talking about what we said 20 years ago we would come back and look at. The other thing is, that is within, that's within 70 miles of the already existing Alaska pipeline. And it's almost a straight shot. If you look at the other side, if you look at where the pipeline is here, on the east side is where Anagar, the section we're talking about, is. On the west side is where we have the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. And Nancy Pelosi said, okay, we got to drill there, we got to force the folks to drill there, we got to have more leases. We're already leasing there. We're already looking. You know why it's tougher there? They have mountains, they have streams, they have rivers, they have all sorts of natural impediments that you don't have in Anagar. In order to get from where they will pump out petroleum in the petroleum, and this is not the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, it's the Alaska Petroleum Reserve. In order to get it out of there, we have to go 250 miles to connect up with the Alaska pipeline. Yet they say that's okay, but this is not. I say we ought to do both in an environmental sensitive way. I've been up there to the pipeline. I've gone all the way up over the pipeline. Now this is 12 years ago when I was Attorney General from here. And as we took the bus, a herd of caribou started racing us down the road. And I accused them of keeping them in the pen and just letting them out every time. It wasn't true. And the caribou herds are greater now than they were before they built the pipeline. You know why? The pipeline has to be warm in order to keep the flow. So we have to have it elevated so it doesn't melt the permafrost. We were concerned that the caribou would be afraid to walk under it, so we actually built little bridges for the caribou to go over. Caribou do not go over the bridges. You know what they do? They go under the pipe because it's warm. And the caribou herd is much larger now than it was. I'm just saying I think we can do these things together, and it just seems to me it would make a great deal of sense. The other thing is, in our bill that I mentioned to you, we say that if we do offshore oil drilling, for instance, that if it's offshore California, California should get a certain percentage of those royalties. They'll pay for our deficit and everything. And a good portion of it should go into a trust fund that funds research and development of alternative energy. Because we think we can marry these two things together. Alternative including renewable.
And would you share your position on renewable energy versus increased oil production for the energy source?
Yeah, mine is all of the above. I support it. As I mentioned earlier, maybe before you got here, I think we have to maintain the tax credits that will expire at the end of this year for production of alternative energy through wind and solar. I have supported additional funds for research into the lithium-ion battery. I came up with the idea of $1 billion prize for the first company that produces a car that makes 100 miles to the gallon and actually produces 60,000 of those units that meets everything else. I have supported the idea of hydroelectric, which is about the cleanest form of renewable energy that you have. When I was talking about using forest fuels that otherwise are going up in these fires that we have, being able to convert that through cellulosic technology to usable energy, that's a renewable resource. That happens every year. I have supported a program in UC Davis that utilizes garbage. You know, we're the Saudi Arabia coal. Folks, we're the Saudi Arabia garbage. We ought to be able to convert that in usable ways. Now, it's not yet totally commercially viable, but they are beginning to do it. I have a company in our district that's in Rancho Cordova that is coming, and actually was founded by several rocket scientists that used to work at GenCorp. And they have used turbine technology for production of energy and sequestration of CO2 into the ground. But not only sequestration of CO2, but if you do it at certain oil fields, or older oil fields, when you push that into the ground, it releases crude that's down there and brings that up. So it's a win-win-win. They produce energy from the turbine. The CO2 that is created goes into the ground, and it pulls up or pushes up additional recovery of petroleum. So, I mean, I'm trying to support all those things. I'm trying to get us in the Congress. We did a survey, and Colonel Kale over there, I'll call him Colonel, he's soon to be a Colonel, who's helping me this year from the Air Force, has worked with us on a review of the energy needs of the federal establishment in the capital region. And one of the things we discovered is most of those departments don't talk to one another. And they got a power plant for GSA, Government Services Administration, sitting there, not too far from the power plant for the Capitol. And we're trying to get them to work together to say maybe there are ways that we can build efficiencies in here. How many billion are we going to spend in
$2 billion over 10 years.
$2 billion over 10 years, just energy for the buildings in and around Washington, D.C. that are federally owned. We think we can bring those costs down. And what I'm trying to do is to say we should be a model for the rest of the country. And so maybe we should make a capital investment. You know, sometimes your initial capital investment doesn't pay back right away.
So you need demonstration project. We got to be a demonstration project. So we have tried to work with Democrats and Republicans and with the administration and others, come up with a concept of a, well, actually we came up with a commission because you can't just do it by itself. But the idea was we would go out and solicit ideas, new ideas, to try and solve some of these answers. And I just think it makes sense. Yes, sir.
Appreciate your comments on energy. Sounds great. Sounds like it's running out of there. I asked a question last year about global warming. Since then, the IPCC says that it's unequivocal that man-made is positive and so important to be over. And it's not an extreme idea for the environmentalists to care about the future. Care about the future project. So I think we have to live sustainably. But my question is, what you said, I'm looking at the record, part of the project Vote Smart, and it says that you voted against adoption of renewable energy standards, which would have given us 50% of energy by 2020. Voted against the bill establishing regulations for economic incentives to increase renewable energy technology and production. Voted against CAFE standards. Voted against, you did not vote on a bill that would have extended renewable energy tax credits and increased taxes on oil companies. There's about half a dozen more that are questionable. Can you kind of help me reconcile to what you said about energy and what is stated on the record for the project Vote Smart?
Yeah, what they are talking about are particular bills that were named a certain thing that may or may not have done those things. Just because you call something a pig a thoroughbred doesn't make it a thoroughbred. You mentioned that last thing, additional tax. What was this? Against certain incentives and taxes. Yeah, but I happen to support that. In fact, I've been pushing that. That's part of my bill. That's part of the bill that I introduced 2 years ago. It's part of the bill that we have in front of the Congress right now. I've been pushing for that, asking for us to have a vote before we went home in August. Now, what you're talking about is something that may have been combined with other things. I know it makes some people feel good to say, well, we need to tax the oil companies more, windfall profits tax, and so forth. I remember what Milton Friedman said. If you want less of something, tax it. If you want more of something, don't tax it. The fact of the matter is, I don't want to make us more reliant on foreign oil and foreign oil companies. ExxonMobil is huge, right? We always talk about ExxonMobil. It's the 15th largest oil company in the world. 15th largest. The other 14 are all foreign countries, and I think almost all of them, if not all of them, are owned by other countries. And then for us to say, in reaction to that, we're going to put more taxes on our domestic production just doesn't make sense to me. So if that was a major part of it, that's probably the reason I voted against that.
So do we end up paying the taxes?
Yeah, last time I checked, CalPERS, SPERS, the state teachers retirement system, most major pension systems, many 401ks, which are your retirement, have oil stocks. And I just read something. You might check these figures because I just ran across it yesterday. It was true that ExxonMobil made $22 billion in profit. That's quarter. And they paid $62 billion in taxes. You hear that word? I want to make sure they pay the taxes. And I want to make sure that there's incentives in the United States for American production, American workers, American owners. That's us. I'd rather have it going to us than it is to these other foreign oil companies. Yes.
In light of your concern about energy and Russia's excess of exportable energy, in light of what's going on with BP, TNK, and most recently Georgia, how do you feel the future is with Russia when they have excess of energy?
Yeah, Russia's a very unstable, quote-unquote, partner. I wouldn't call them an ally because I don't think they are. Russia is trying to use its energy resources as a more than leverage, almost blackmail against the West of Europe, and particularly those countries that used to be in the Soviet orbit. As I mentioned a few months ago, I was on a trip looking at energy issues in Europe, and after we were in France for those two sites I mentioned, we went on to Poland and went on to the Czech Republic. They are very much threatened, if you will, or intimidated, if you will, by Russia and Russia's almost monopoly on natural gas. Now, one of the reasons is that if you look at the Economic Union, they have said, or excuse me, the European Union, they have said that they've given different countries the percentage of energy that has to be produced by cleaner energy, less carbon. Now, you take a country like Poland that is, I think, 96% dependent on coal. It makes it impossible for it to reach its mark unless they get natural gas from from Russia, which is now acting like the old Soviet Union. So there's this tremendous pressure that Russia is exerting. Now, you might say, why don't we just respond even more aggressively than we have with respect to Russia, what Russia's doing with Georgia? Part of the problem is we've been using Russia to put leverage on Iran, because we're trying to suggest to Russia that they have more to lose than we do with the wild Iran that's a nuclear power. And they have a relationship with Iran based on trade and other things. So it makes it kind of complicated going on. But I would say this, they are an unreliable partner. And I believe what John McCain said about Putin rather than what President Bush said. President Bush said, I don't even remember his famous words, he says, I look into his eyes and I see a soul. And John McCain says, I look into Putin's eyes and I see three things. KGB. And John McCain said this 2 or 3 years ago, and it's been proven right. They're acting like people who are trained by the KGB right now. And so we have a difficult situation. It also shows that no matter what you think about past conflicts that have been resolved, there's never going to be a world in which it is totally free of concerns, potential conflicts, and how we manage that with diplomacy, with economy, including economic sanctions, military strength. I mean, that's really the challenge for any administration that happens to be in power. And I think now folks are waking up and seeing, why is Putin acting like that? He was just at the Olympics. He was just shaking hands with the president. He was just, kissing their winners on the cheek and so forth. And then he immediately goes back to Georgia. And now some people can say, well, Georgia overstepped in what they were doing in that section. But frankly, you can't justify what Russia's done in return. And it may be that Russia's sending a very strong message to the other free nations that used to be part of the Soviet orbit, which is, we will use military might too. So I think there's a couple of things we ought to do. Frankly, we ought to bring these countries into NATO as quickly as possible. And secondly, we ought to complete our agreement with them to have radar installations for our missile defense system. And that will cement the relationship we have with those countries who have a right to be free.
But those countries are not in NATO. They don't get into NATO without us. And Russia continues to military states prepared to respond militarily in places like Georgia, Ukraine, talking about Poland,
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing for us to figure out right now. If we have there's an interlocking relationship with those countries where they are part of NATO, then all of NATO has an obligation to respond. Then it's not a question of do you respond or don't you respond. It is part of an absolute treaty obligation. So the Russians would have to understand that. I happen to think perhaps our reluctance in allowing those countries to join NATO has been an invitation to
to Russia or to Putin to act in the way he has. That is, he thought, all right, they're not really serious about their relationship with these countries. Now I can move in. We need to make it very clear, it seems to me, that we stand with those countries. I'm not going to argue that we need to send troops in right now, and that's the proper response. What I'm saying is, as this thing cools down, as we work out whatever we are able to work out at this point in time, I think we do as quickly as possible bring Georgia in, bring some of these other countries in to NATO. I mean, Russia has made it, at least this leadership in Russia, made it clear what they're doing. I mean, they've got a autocracy there. I mean, they want capitalism, but they don't want democracy. They want a form of elitism for those who are in power, who gain power as a result of their previous positions of leadership, KGB and so forth, through intimidation. And I just think it's a difficult line we have to walk, so I think we can walk it. But I think part of it is accepting those countries in NATO sooner rather than later.
The problem is the war is too late. Countries basically have to lock the the U.S. hasn't brought Georgia into NATO, but it has a very, very strong relationship with Georgia. It's also military.
Right.
And it seems like maybe the United States has a responsibility to do something more than issue warnings.
I agree. Well, remember what happened. Georgia actually sent troops to the war zone, the police force, and actually had them. We used our planes and our pilots to bring their troops back from there to Georgia. Believe it or not, upsetting Putin in Russia, saying, how could you take sides and do this sort of thing? That was the least we could do, it seems to me. And I think we need to make it clear from now on that we will accept these countries as full partners in NATO. There was an uncertainty. We're not bringing them into NATO. Russia said, you guys aren't serious about this. Yes, sir.
But in that regard, there is somewhat of a conflict between the whole Russia and the sphere of influence. And I'm not talking, I know one article today in the law in 1924 before the development. Well, yeah, in 1994, let's go a bit too recent, go back further, and the old czars, years, Ukraine, Belarus, all those countries were totally Russian. So I think we need to be a little bit careful in how we approach it.
Well, I'm certainly not going to be one who says that Russia can come back and take over the Ukraine. I think the people of the Ukraine have proven that they don't want to be Russian. They are proud people for themselves. They established their government there. They want to have a different system. They don't want to be in their heel. I understand what you're saying about there's been this dispute about this section of Georgia that they've been fighting over initially. And there's some question as to how the Georgia government reacted to certain quote-unquote political disputes in that section. And it gave Russia an opportunity to go in and say, hey, wait a second, we're going to stop the ethnic cleansing here. Well, just remember the old Soviet Constitution, and at least equal, if not greater rights than the U.S. Constitution, only to no one leave. Same sort of thing. I don't think you go into some place and become lazy and say, we know better than everybody else. But I think when you have people who make a determination that they want to live under a certain system, and they adopt our line, and they want to be free, and we have the opportunity to integrate them into a NATO scenario, I think we ought to do it. And I also want to think, we've made Russia, we've allowed them, the G7, Russia would not be in the G8 by their economic status. We made that decision. It was the G7 plus Russia now become the G8. Why do you reward them for bad behavior?
There was a suggestion to take them out of G8.
Yes.
How reasonable, how feasible, that seems to be
It'd be more reasonable if John McCain's like the president.
Yes, of course.
Because he should have some position.
But technically, is it,
Well, sure, technically, the question just doesn't make a good deal of sense. Part of it is, sometimes if you threaten things, the threat's more effective than actually doing it. But I mean, John McCain's position is you shouldn't reward bad behavior. And if they want to engage in bad behavior, I mean serious bad behavior, where they're threatening the economic vitality of many of the countries of Eastern Europe for their political purposes, why should we enhance their ability to do that by giving them the status of being part of the G8 and by therefore aligning ourselves in certain ways with economic agreements with them? It doesn't make sense.
My name is Nick Salemi. I am a veteran. I just spent about 35 years.
Congratulations.
Came back to Southwest buy a home and start off my family life and whatnot here. And in 2006, when I bought my house here, it was astronomical rate, what I paid for it, and now it's worth about $100 less. And with the fuel prices, my wife actually commutes to Jackson every day because that's pretty much the best spot for her job in Atlanta to get the best salary. So we've got huge mortgage. The house is negative $100,000, and the economy is poor. And we've got fuel costs that we're paying about $800 a month in fuel alone on her vehicle. And it's a 6-cylinder vehicle. It's not too much, but anyways. What can be done as far as, I guess, bouncing back the economy locally here, due to all the stuff that's going on in Stockton and Antigua with the housing market, which was mainly comprised of illegal immigrants buying houses without Social Security numbers, without valid income statements, and they bailed out their houses, causing the surrounding areas to be affected by.
Yeah, let me thank you for your service. And say we appreciate it very much. On the area of housing, I voted against the housing bill coming out of the House because I thought it was not a good bill. In some respects, good in some respects, not good in others. My hope and expectation was it would go to the Senate and become a better bill because the President said he was going to veto it if they didn't take certain things out. In the interim between the time we passed out of the House and the time we came back to the Senate, we had a visit by the Secretary of the Treasury to our conference to talk to us about how dire certain economic circumstances were. And the fear that if we didn't pass a bill now, that many investors in this country and around the world were going to view that as a huge loss, and we were going to suffer even greater losses in the housing market, in the stock market, and in other parts of this country in terms of the economy. I have to tell you, it concerned me. Someone might say it scared me enough that I voted for the bill when it came back out of the Senate, because the President lifted his veto message, and it looked like the world economy, as it looked at the United States, would have viewed our failure to pass a bill as a real negative, and we would have had things in the tailspin. So a good portion of what's in that bill I do not like. Several things I do like. One is that we will have far better regulation on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac than we had in the past. These are two huge institutions that are GESs. They're not government agencies, but they act like government agencies for purposes of having the protection of the government. But they're not government agencies, and they can pay astronomical salaries. They have private investors, and they also get involved politically with contributions in politics in ways that people who are federal employees cannot do. For about 15 years, a member of Congress named Richard Baker from Louisiana warned about this, so we got to change it. Republican. He was fought by Republican leadership and Democratic leadership. He said it's going to get out of control, they're going to get too big, they're not going to be serious about the risk involved, and you're going to have a real problem on your hands. That's exactly what happened. The problem got so big we couldn't not do something to bail it out, which is unfair to some people. You know, I mean, you're sitting there working as hard as you can to make your payments. Somebody else is instead of working as hard as you are, is not working as hard. And they're asking for the government to help them, meaning you and everybody else pays for it. And I realize that's part of the problem. We do have in this bill some incentive for banks to work out currently existing mortgages with people who hold them. There's a program, somewhat controversial, but nonetheless it is in there, which would allow banks or the mortgage issuer to scale down the principal involved in the loan to 85% of the principal based on the loss of value of the house. And that new mortgage being paid by the person who owns the house, but if they then sell the house when the value comes back, they have to share that with the government essentially. We'll see how that works. We've heard from the lending institutions that if we put that in, they'd actually use it. I don't know whether they are using it. We also put in greater encouragement for those programs that allow you counseling to work with your lender to see if you can work things out on that. Put some funding into that. We also put some funding into local and state government. I was a little worried about this. This allows local and state governments to purchase homes that are on the market, that are otherwise foreclosed. I get a little worried with the government getting that involved. But the fact of the matter is, if they do, that will take some of that off the market, hopefully thereby stopping that continual loss of value in the house. To be perfectly honest, I don't see the light yet in this thing. I don't see us recovering in the Stockton area and further in the Central Valley. We've been hit pretty hard. So those are the things you might, you can contact our office and we can see if we can make sure that you're aware of the programs that are now coming into play as a result of that bill coming in.
I just want to make sure there's regulations in place that stop from having people that don't have the income, don't have
you're right.
status as a U.S. citizen, and they're buying houses with 3 other families, and they're creating apartment loans for those that are trying to make it.
There's a couple things that are being done. One is all the way down to, if you start with appraisers, to lenders, to the ones who purchase, to Wall Street, all the way through, you're going to see, and I'm not a big regulation guy, but in this case it seems to me we need it. There's some more stringent requirements for the appraisers, which I think is good. Secondly, I think there's going to be far more oversight of banks to ensure that when they create a loan, that there's value behind the asset that loan is for. And then next, you're going to see the big banks or the big institutions that bought the bundled mortgages, the financial instrument that was securitized by any number of mortgages. They're going to require to have those instruments on the books. For whatever reason, they didn't have to carry those instruments on the books. So if a regulator came in to look at the books, they didn't say, okay, you say you have this much worth of assets versus your loan. Let's look at these assets to make sure they are what you say they are. Well, when they're not on your books, you don't have to do that. So I think all the way through, we're going to do a better job of that than we have before. And frankly, it is up to local and county governments to enforce their laws with respect to zoning. If a single family housing, we have multiple families in single houses, that's up to enforcement at that level.
I work in the crop insurance industry for a company that provides the whole backyard crop insurance to the farm, and I see it all the time. I work in Oregon all the way down south to Bakersfield, and the majority of people I see out there in the fields are people that are living in brand new houses with a few other relatives in there. And they're either using fake identities or I'd love to blow the whistle, but the farmers need workers and no one wants to work.
Well, I'm one of those who believes we need a temporary worker program, so we decide who comes in, when they come in, how long they're here, and that does not necessarily need a citizenship. You serve in the armed forces. some people say it's unfair that we would have temporary workers come in here and not bring their families. How many men and women do we send overseas to fight and defend us that don't bring their families? And we don't say that's unfair. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to how you and your colleagues from California represent California's interests? That is to say, how are you representing us Californians? What are you doing for us in Congress?
Well, let me answer that a couple of different ways. One is I have to think if I do something for the nation, it usually goes up for California.
And I accept that, and I agree with what you said.
Yeah, I have to think that the tax policy, investment policy, regulatory policy impacts California. In a couple of areas, you know, the rural school program, where we need to fund the rural schools based on the history of the lack of timber production and so forth, and federal land zoning. I've been working on trying to make sure that that gets passed. I actually voted for it even though they put it in a bad bill because I had made a promise that I would vote for it if we did everything that we had. That still has not been completed, but we'll get that done. That affects California's rural areas. I have a bill which says, I'm on a bill that says that we have drilling offshore California. California gets a significant percentage of the royalty. That I would hope would go towards getting rid of some of this deficit that we've got. I mean, I don't like to say I told you so, but if I'd been elected governor 10 years ago, we wouldn't have this deficit. I mean, no one wanted to talk about that. We have tried to work in our area, in my area, not here in the foothills, it wasn't as impacted as much as the area where I live down in Gold River and so forth. I've tried to forge an alliance with Democrats and Republicans to have reasonable federal assistance in our levees and our waterways in California. And I will say this governor is the first governor in many years who actually worked on putting out bonds so that we could actually build up our levees in California. So that I can go back there working with Democrats and Republicans and say, state of California is doing something, it's putting money forward, so can you do that as well? We've got more funding for that. I happen to think, and I know this is controversial, but I happen to think we need more water storage in this state. And there is that's a cooperative effort necessary between the federal and the state. I had my staff, because I wasn't there, I wasn't able to do it, testify before the water board about the water rights for the Bureau of Reclamation, if they were at some point in time to go forward with Auburn Dam. Now, I know that's controversial, but the fact of the matter is, if they don't have the water rights for that, that is one way of vetoing that dam if we ever try to build it in the future. Now, in my area, we have a greater, where I live, we have a greater threat from flood than does or did New Orleans. We have twice the potential damage that they had there. And we have currently we have one half the protection that New Orleans had before Katrina. Now, the only way to give it the 1 in 500 year flood protection is to build Auburn Dam. There's no, I've asked experts, and I know whether they're for it or against it, tell me what you can do. It's the only way to do it. I support the efforts to try and build up Folsom. We're doing that. That'll give us maybe from 99 to maybe close to 200 years. But that's still less than what New Orleans had. So I would have to think those are something. One of the areas in national legislation was I was the main author of the Safe Ports Act. We have the largest ports in the country here in California, Long Beach, Los Angeles. We have Oakland, we have a number of others. And worked with a liberal Democrat, Jim Harmon, to create a bill that will protect our ports from terrorist attack in ways that we've never done before. And I tried to do it on a bipartisan basis, got 0 votes against it in the subcommittee, 0 votes against it in the committee. And we passed on the floor of the House with only 2% of the vote. That's pretty tough to do. 400, I don't know how many voted that day, probably 425 to 2. So that helps all states, but it helps California more than any other. And I have insisted in the area, it's one of the areas I work with, Homeland Security, that the funding go according to risk. When I first got back there, the original money after 9/11 went everywhere. Everybody wanted something, whether there was a need for it or not from a security standpoint and a terrorism standpoint. It made no sense to me. It ought to be risk-based, and so I'm trying to impose that. It happens that California benefits from that, but it could happen in the future. We're not the necessary targets that we will, but it just seems to me to make no sense. So I've been trying to do things that I think are in California's interest, but they're international. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Just one question. Last month I became a couple of years in Germany in this country and decided to work with you and want to see the best practice to look at. There's one aspect of course and that is health.
Yeah.
My husband has a very good health insurance, but still when I go to the doctor, I'm always worried about the risk will come back. I open the newspaper and there's someone with cancer, and the poor person not only has to worry about the sickness, he has to worry how he pays his bill. And in a rich country like this, that should be I think everybody should at least have the minimum coverage so that nobody has to be worried.
Well, I would love to be able to say no one has to worry. I don't think we'll ever come to that, but we can certainly have less worry than we have today. What I would like to do, and what I've been working with a number of members on, is try and bring us together to try and figure out a comprehensive approach to it. Doing a couple of things. One is to make sure that the best parts of our system aren't lost in any new system that we have. I mean, people immediately say to me, hey, look at Canada when we have the Canadian system, etc. If you have a closed system like that, you need to have some pressure valve to release the pressure. And for Canada, those pressure valves are Seattle, Minneapolis, and Detroit. They literally come across the border to take that care. As a matter of fact, there's a recent member of Parliament up there, she's identified as a Liberal member, who was voted for their programs, who when she needed to be treated for cancer came to the United States for treatment. So I don't want to lose that. The other thing is, out of the last, I think I'm right on this, out of the last 25 Nobel laureates for medicine, 22 were from the United States. So there's something to be said for a system, if you wish, that creates the incentives overall that the greatest portion of the advances in medicine come from here. Having said that, I understand what you're saying. We've got to okay, let me refer to John McCain's approach, because I think it's a pretty good approach, fairly fundamental and comprehensive. He's analyzed it to say, if you look what happened with the construction of the health system in the United States, it was not for health purposes. It was created because we had wage and price control during World War II. And so you couldn't vary your wages because they were set by the government. So one way you are able to attract employees or employees were able to negotiate was health benefits, because they were not considered wages, so they weren't controlled. And we set up a system where the employer gets to take it off taxes for the amount of money. It's a business expenditure. So that's how it started. And what it has come is that now we have a system that's not portable. In other words, if I'm with one employer and I lose that job, I can't necessarily take it somewhere else. What we're trying to construct is a system where it would be, someone said it would be like a health backpack that you can take with you. Now, how do you get there? You try and say, right now, the incentive in the tax policy is for employee-supplied health care. Because, as I said, there's a tax break there, but if you buy it yourself, you don't get the tax break. The idea is to try and transfer that tax break from the employer to the employee. And allow you, and I forget what the number, we've got various different numbers, to buy a policy tax-free up to a certain amount, and it would be based on what we consider to be the fundamental kind of coverage that we all think we ought to have. Now, there's another thing it seems to me we can do, and that is your health care packages now are defined by law in every state.
decision, you may not be able to buy it in California because the California legislature decided nobody could do that. I would support a proposal that would allow you to look at every single health package that's out there legally under any state, and you could buy that health care, and it would be enforced by the laws here in California and by the insurance commissioner. So instead of maybe having 8 options, you may have 500 options. And I happen to think that competition would help in allowing you to be able to design your health care as you wish it to be. The third thing is, I think we have to somehow make sure that doctor-patient relationship remains very strong. And what I mean by that is, the decision ought to be made based on the doctor you want to go to, based on the decision you make with him or her, as opposed to who the insurance company tells you to go to. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it's something I think we have to do. And the fourth thing, and some people don't like to hear this, is we all have to have skin in the game. And what I mean by that is, if you get something for free or it seems like it's free, you're going to use it even though you may not need it. And sometimes the way our policies are structured is you pay virtually nothing for what should be considered relatively minor things. And the more you do that, the more people have a tendency to overutilize that, as opposed to having that go towards what you really need. And then lastly, it seems to me, as a backup, the government should be there to assist people in providing a coverage for catastrophic. It seems to me that's where people feel that most vulnerable. If I've got a policy that's going to take care of virtually things I'm going to run into most of my life and so forth, I ought to be able to make that decision. If I got to pay a little bit more for that, that's my decision. No, if I pay a little bit more for that, frankly, I may say to the doctor, you really think I need this x-ray? I just had an x-ray 2 months ago. And one other thing I forgot is IT. If we can bring the computerized era into medicine, it will do a couple of things. One, it will lessen the number of wrong prescriptions, because anywhere you go, you'll be able to have the doctor who takes care of you, you using your protected password, to see what you've already had, to see what's contraindicated, to see maybe you don't need a different test for this or that or something else. And we know it will save money. The problem is it takes capital investment in the first place. We've got to figure out how to do that. And I know I said it last thing. I've got one other thing. And that is, if we drastically decrease the number of hospital-borne infections in this country, we would reduce by tremendous amount of money what our healthcare costs are. We would save lives. We would shorten hospitalization. And the federal government has just started doing this by imposing an obligation for Medicare patients. If a patient gets an infection in the hospital, Medicare does not pay for the treatment. They're required to pay for that treatment. Guess what? Some of those infection rates are going down. I also think there ought to have total transparency. You ought to know whatever hospital it is. You ought to be able to phone them up or call or write them or go by email and look at what the infection rates are, service by service by service. And then your doctor says, I want you to go to this hospital. You say, I just looked it up. And their staph infection rate among the orthopedic patients is 3 times as high as it is over here. I'm not going there, I'm going here. It does make a difference. It does make a difference.
Congressman, I really would like to make a point to our friend and to all the Americans who are in error on that point, and to you, because you have that question all the time. The so-called free insurance in England, Canada, France, Germany is not free. It's more expensive for individual people there to buy insurance than for us in America, and the service is less quality than here. The other thing people don't know in Europe how much they pay for health insurance, because their employer pays half of the salary for health insurance. So when they make $2,500 a month, in fact they make $5,000 a month, but they don't know that, and half of their salary is paid by the employer for the health service. And in England, they copy our American service, which means that They don't use the free service because it's so bad, and then they cannot even get into the hospital, so they pay privately to get help. But I hear that all the time because obviously we are German and French Americans. So people come and say, "Oh, your country is so good. Why do you think we're here?"
I have to explain that with a West Texas accent. Shows you how long I've been standing here, right? Listen, the gentleman right behind me.
I have a neighbor who's a doctor. He's probably quick because it's a constant insurance and liability is extremely high. That's why I'm using it for the party music about insurance and everything. Weekends to get down. That's why it's not staying up.
Yeah, a question about doctors. Now we did deal with, the California legislature did deal with medical malpractice back in 1975, 76 with MICRA, the Medical Insurance something act, it was MICRA, that limited the total amount for pain and suffering, but did not limit it for injuries, physical injuries, or loss of earnings. That has seemed to work pretty well. We actually had a large number of doctors leave California at that time because they couldn't afford the insurance, and in fact, a number of specialties, some people like his school left at that time. That seems to have moderated. What I have heard from doctors is that if they take a Medicare patient, the amount they get reimbursed is getting less and less and less, and the cost of maintaining their office is going up. Actually, if we hadn't acted in a vote that I took a little while ago, you would have seen a precipitous drop in the reimbursement rate of about 45%. I think is the number for doctors, which means that most doctors are not taking Medicare at all. So, having said that, we do a little patch every year. That's not going to solve it. If you really want to know where the huge fiscal problem is in the United States federal government, it's in Medicare, Medicaid, which we call Medi-Cal in California, and Social Security. Those three systems cannot sustain themselves, and we turn our back on them and pretend it doesn't exist because we're afraid to deal with it politically. Yet those programs, anybody look at them and say they just are not going to sustain themselves. So we need to do some real tough decisions. I know it's, I see people standing, I know it's past 8. We promised that we would be here from 6:30 to 8. I thank you for coming. We have, I've got a couple other members of my staff who finally showed up, and they're here right on the bench, and you can always talk with them, bother them, and so forth. We're always available at our office, or you can look website luncopth08.house.gov, and thanks very much for being here.